Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we are finally able to check out the GeForce RTX 3070. This is Nvidia's latest mid-range GeForce offering, targeting the $500 US price range. And I would like to dedicate this review to our good mate Kevin from Tech Showdown. He tragically passed away very suddenly this time last year, and we've had the Australian cousin of Kevin's teddy in the background ever since. We miss the guy a lot, especially around new releases like this, as Kevin would share in the excitement with us. Okay, so last month we sort of saw the arrival of the RTX 3080 and the RTX 3090. I mean, we got to show you the benchmarks and a few cards and that sort of stuff, but it seems as though very few of you were able to buy one. We're almost 6 weeks now from the initial release of the RTX 3080, and availability is still virtually non-existent, which frankly isn't good enough, and it's looking very much like Nvidia has botched this release. We have heard various stories within the industry that this might have been planned, a way to drive up pricing, so once supply does start to flow, people will be well adjusted to prices above MSRP. It all sounds a bit crazy, but then we saw exactly that with the GeForce RTX 2080 Ti, which in reality was never a $1,000 US product, instead coming in at more like $1,200 US or more, and pricing to other regions like here in Australia was heavily inflated. So for Nvidia, time really is running out. Whether this is a deliberate action or just a gross miscalculation of demand, the brand is taking a hit. The backlash from gamers is more extreme than we ever imagined it would be, and perhaps it's a situation where Nvidia didn't foresee the backlash either. Whatever the case, the failure of the 3080 and 3090 launch has put the more affordable RTX 3070 in a bit of a rough spot. It was initially slated for release on the 15th of October. However, having witnessed just how poorly the lack of availability was received by gamers, Nvidia wisely opted to push the 3070 release back by 2 weeks to the 29th of October, allowing them to build up a larger stockpile for release day. So, hopefully your chances of buying an RTX 3070 in 2 days' time when they hit shelves on the 29th are going to be much higher. And we're really hoping to see strong availability within 3 to 4 weeks after release, but so far that does seem unlikely given what we've seen with the 3080 and 3090. Now, while you pray for improved availability of these parts, we have a video sponsor. Today's video sponsor is Be Quiet, and their brand new line of pure loop high-performance liquid coolers available in 120, 240, 280 and 360mm radiator versions using Pure Wing's 2 PWM fans. A really interesting design aspect of the Pure Loop is the doubly decoupled pump, which isn't situated in the CPU block, but rather in the tubes near the radiator, and this design minimizes vibration and therefore reduces the operating volume. The CPU block features a minimalistic design to suit all builds, and with the nickel-plated cold plate can be used with liquid metal. And to ensure longevity, the loop is also serviceable with an easy-to-access refill port, and Be Quiet even includes a coolant bottle in the kit. So, for more information, please check the link in the video description. So moving on from horrid availability, let's quickly talk about the RTX 3070 before jumping into all the benchmark data. Whereas the 3080 and 3090 share the same GA102 die, the 3070 is based on the almost 40% smaller GA104 die. It packs 32% fewer CUDA cores and TMUs with the same 96 ROPs. That said, the cores are clocked higher, though we're only talking about a 4% increase for the base clock and a percentage for the boost clock. The memory subsystem's also been downgraded. Firstly, we're moving away from 10GB of high-speed GDDR6X memory to 8GB of standard 14GB per second GDDR6. And with a narrower 256-bit wide memory bus, this does limit the peak bandwidth to 448GB per second. Still, despite those downgrades, Nvidia has claimed that the RTX 3070 is on par with the RTX 2080 Ti, though of course it is missing 3GB of VRAM. But at $500 US, at least that's the claimed MSRP, it is worlds cheaper than the RTX 2080 Ti, so if it delivers similar performance, that will be a bit of a big deal. Now, an advantage of the cut down design is the much lower TDP rating of 220 watts. That's 100 watts lower than the 3080 and 30 watts lower than the outgoing 2080 Ti. This should mean that 3070 base graphics cards will be cool, quiet, and easier on your power supply, so we'll look into that later on in the review. But for now, that's about everything we want to talk about. It's time to get into the blue bar graphs. For testing, we're using our Ryzen 9 3950X test system, featuring 4 sticks of low latency DDR4 3200 CL14 memory. Kicking off the benchmarks with Death Stranding at 1440p, we indeed find RTX 2080 Ti Lite performance from the new 3070, pumping out 134 FPS on average. When compared to the similarly priced 2070 Super, that is a 30% performance boost and a 24% increase from the 5700 XT, so a lot less impressive in terms of cost per frame compared to AMD's 5700 series, at least in this title. Even at 4K, the 3070 is seen matching the 2080 Ti with 83 FPS on average, making it just shy of 30% slower than the 3080. So that's a good result overall for a GPU said to cost just $500 US. Next up, we have Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, and here the 3070 again matched the 2080 Ti. In fact, we're not even talking about 2080 Ti Lite performance at 1440p, but rather exactly 2080 Ti performance. The 3070 does drop off a little bit at 4K, and this is likely due to only having 8GB of VRAM, but the performance hit isn't massive, but Flight Simulator 2020 will be pushing beyond the 8GB capacity with the ultra quality settings at 4K, and as a result the RTX 3070 pays a small performance penalty. I'm starting to sense a trend here. Again, we're looking at very similar performance to that of the 2080 Ti at 1440p, this time in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. That means we're looking at about a 30% performance increase for Nvidia at the $500 US price point when compared to the 2070 Super, and 55% from the vanilla 2070. Again, we see that the 3070 slips behind slightly at 4K. Here VRAM usage hits around 7.5 to 8GB, so it's possible we're on the edge of a VRAM capacity limitation here, or the tiny performance hit could be due to memory bandwidth. Either way, we're only talking about the 3070 being a few frames down on the 2080 Ti. Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege makes heavy use of compute, and this hands the Ampere architecture an advantage, a very small advantage over Turing, but it does help. As a result, the RTX 3070 was 5% faster than the 2080 Ti at 1440p, and 44% faster than the 2070 Super. The 3070 also remains strong at 4K, again edging out the 2080 Ti by a few frames, making it 21% slower than the 3080, but 47% faster than the 2070 Super. Moving on to F1 2020. Again, we're looking at 2080 Ti Lite performance from the 3070, making it 34% faster than the 2070 Super, but just 19% faster than the 5700 XT. The RTX 3070 slips a few frames behind the 2080 Ti at 4K, but we're talking about just a 2 FPS margin here, so the same performance then. That meant the 3070 was almost 40% faster than the 2070 Super, but just 30% faster than the 5700 XT. We're seeing more of the same in Gears 5. The 3070 was able to match the 2080 Ti. Actually, it was 3 FPS faster here, but again, we're talking about basically the same performance. Though we are only looking at a 27% boost over the 2070 Super, and slightly less over the 5700 XT. At 4K, the 3070 again matched the 2080 Ti, and that meant it was 33% faster than the 2070 Super, and almost 40% faster than the 5700 XT. Interestingly, the RTX 3070 was 8% faster than the 2080 Ti at 1440p in Horizon Zero Dawn, delivering 96 FPS on average, and that made it 45% faster than the 2070 Super, and 37% faster than the 5700 XT, so a solid result here. Performance for the 3070 remained very strong at 4K, as here it was 10% faster than the 2080 Ti, and a whopping 51% faster than the 2070 Super. Moving on to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and you guessed it, 2080 Ti Lite performance at 1440p. The gains over the 2070 Super are very weak in this title, at least when using a 3rd gen Ryzen processor. We're talking about just a 14% increase. There's no CPU bottleneck to be seen at 4K, and as a result the 3070 was 39% faster than the 2070 Super, and even managed to beat the 2080 Ti by a 9% margin, so quite an impressive result. We're seeing a small performance boost over the 2080 Ti at 1440p with 4% more frames on average, though interestingly we do see an 8% increase to the 1% low result. Anyway, that meant the 3070 was 38% faster than the 2070 Super and 36% faster than the 5700 XT. Then jumping up to 4K sees the 3070 running just a single frame ahead of the 2080 Ti. So once again, we're looking at 2080 Ti Lite performance. And this meant that while the 3070 was 25% slower than the 3080, it was almost 40% faster than the 2070 Super. Next up we have Metro Exodus, and the results here are a little unexpected as the 3070 trailed the 2080 Ti by a 7% margin, and that meant it was just 16% faster than the 2070 Super at 1440p. The 4K data is just as unexpected. Here the 3070 gets close to the average frame rate of the 2080 Ti, but it is well down on the 1% low performance, only matching the 2080 Super. The Resident Evil 3 results are more what we've come to expect. The 3070 is seen delivering very similar performance to that of the 2080 Ti. Here it was just 3% slower at 1440p. The RTX 3070 drops off a little further at 4K. Here it was 6% slower, so not a terrible result, and it was still 39% faster than the 2070 Super. Moving on to the Doom Eternal results, and here we see that the 3070 is 7% slower than the 2080 Ti at 1440p, which is a little surprising to see in this title. That said, we're still talking about an almost 40% performance boost over the 2070 Super and 35% over the 5700 XT. Now at 4K, using the Ultra Nightmare textures, which does call for 9GB of VRAM, we find that the 3070 falls further behind the 2080 Ti, now trailing by a 14% margin. But other 8GB models like the 2070 Super also suffer here, and as a result the higher memory bandwidth of the 3070 plays a more crucial role, allowing it to beat the 2070 Super by a 52% margin. However, if you lower the texture quality to Ultra, which only requires 7GB of VRAM, the 3070 is now able to match the 2080 Ti, rendering 141 FPS on average. The second last game tested is Wolfenstein Youngblood, and here we're seeing the 3070 match the 2080 Ti almost exactly, making it 21% slower than the 3080 and 38% faster than the 2070 Super. Then at 4K, the RTX 3070 was 3% slower than the 2080 Ti and 26% slower than the 3080, but it was also 37% faster than the 2070 Super. Last up, we have Hitman 2, and you guessed it, 2080 Ti-like performance at 1440p. We do see the 3070 drop off slightly at 4K. Here it was just 4% slower than the 2080 Ti, but 55% faster than the 2070 Super. Okay, so I think it is safe to say that the RTX 3070 is very much delivering 2080 Ti-like performance as promised by Nvidia. So that was good to see, and in a moment we will move to look at some head-to-head comparisons with the 3080, 2080 Ti, 2070 Super and 5700 XT, but before that, here is a look at the average FPS data across the 14 game sample. Although I didn't show the 1080p data here, I did collect it, and I'll make those results available to Patreon members. But for everybody else, I do have the 14 game average data to share, and as you can see, the 3070 is basically a 2080 Ti, averaging 185 FPS on average across all the games tested. That meant on average at 1080p, the RTX 3070 is 26% faster than the 5700 XT and 27% faster than the 2070 Super, while it was also just 12% slower than the RTX 3080. Moving on to 1440p, this sees the RTX 3070 beat the 5700 XT by a 36% margin and the 2070 Super by a 33% margin, while it was just 18% slower than the RTX 3080. Oh, and here it matched the 2080 Ti exactly. So once again, we are now looking at 2080 Ti performance for $500 US. Then at 4K, the 3070 slips a few frames behind the 2080 Ti due to titles such as Doom Eternal, but even so, it was still 38% faster than the 2070 Super on average, and 48% faster than the 5700 XT, which really isn't a 4K gaming graphics card. Okay, so here's a breakdown between the 2080 Ti and 3070 at 1440p. As you can see, the RTX 3070 does very well in Horizon Zero Dawn and Rainbow Six Siege, while it is less impressive in Doom Eternal and Metro Exodus, though we are only talking about a 7% margin here. Basically, at most, we're looking at single-digit percentage differences between these two GPUs. The 2080 Ti does fare a little bit better at 4K thanks to that extra 3GB of VRAM, though it really was only Doom Eternal with the Ultra Nightmare textures that was an issue for the 3070 and its 8GB VRAM buffer. Then compared to the RTX 3080, the 3070 was at most 26% slower, seen in Resident Evil 3, while it was as little as 7% slower in Hitman 2, though here we are CPU limited at 1440p. Increasing the resolution of 4K removes any and all CPU bottlenecks, and here we can see that the 3070 is between 19 and 37% slower than the RTX 3080, though we're not limited by VRAM capacity, it's only up to 28% slower. When compared to the RTX 2070 Super, the product the 3070 is arguably replacing, we're looking at a 31% performance boost on average at 1440p, with margins as high as 45% as seen in Horizon Zero Dawn. Then at 4K, we're seeing that the 3070 is on average 38% faster than the 2070 Super, which is quite a substantial performance uplift, especially with gains as large as 50% in Doom Eternal and Horizon Zero Dawn. The comparison with the 5700 XT is interesting, as the 3070 was on average 34% faster at 1440p, which means in terms of cost per frame, they should be very similar. That said, for those targeting 4K, the 3070 does become considerably better in terms of value, as here it was seen to be 47% faster on average, and that is quite a significant performance uplift. Okay, so here's a look at total system consumption using our Ryzen 9 3950X test system. The RTX 3070 pushed total system usage to 371 watts, and under the same conditions, the 2080 Ti reached 433 watts, which means the 3070 consumed 14% less power. It also used almost 30% less power than the RTX 3080. And we're also looking at a similar power draw to the RTX 2070 Super, so a very efficient GPU indeed. Using PCAT to measure the power draw of just the graphics card, we see that the 3070 consumed just 6 watts more, or 3% more power, than the 2070 Super, and 10% less than the 5700 XT. We're also looking at a 31% reduction when compared to the 3080, and 14% less than the 2080 Ti. What this means is, in terms of performance per watt, the GeForce RTX 3070 is now the most efficient graphics card we've ever tested, delivering 9% more performance per watt than the RTX 3080 and 17% more per watt than the 2080 Ti. It's also 59% more efficient than the 7nm Radeon RX 5700 XT, so it will be interesting to see how AMD can improve on that shortly. In a few days' time, I'll be taking a look at some custom AIB 3070s, and I'll be comparing them to Nvidia's Founders Edition with a detailed look at VRM and GDDR6X memory temperatures. But in the meantime, here is a quick look at how the RTX 3070 Founders Edition ran after an hour in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. The GPU peaked at just 72 degrees with a fan speed of 1650 RPM, which is very reasonable, and here the card was very quiet. The average clock speed seen in this test was 1890 MHz, so just shy of 1.9 GHz, and of course the memory operated at 14 gigabits per second. Just quickly, here's a look at overclocking headroom with the FE model. I was able to get the cores to a maximum frequency of 1805 MHz, which is a measly 4% overclock, but with the increased power budget and 14% boost to memory bandwidth, I did see an 8% increase in FPS when testing with Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 1440p. Now, here's a look at cost per frame, starting with the 1440p data. As you can see, the RTX 3070 is now the best value graphics card in terms of cost per frame, coming out 7% cheaper compared to the standard RX 5700, and 25% more cost effective than the 2070 Super. Basically, you're now getting RTX 2080 Ti performance for well under half the price, as we don't recognize the $1,000 US MSRP for the 2080 Ti. That was basically a lie, with most models selling for $1,200 US or more. The cost per frame is a little more reliable at 4K, as here we're removing any and all system bottlenecks. Even so, the RTX 3070 still comes out on top, just beating the RTX 3080. This meant it was 27% cheaper per frame than the 2070 Super, so a much better value proposition at the $500 US price point. Something Nvidia has made a big deal of with their new Ampere architecture is their so-called second generation of RT cores and third generation tensor cores. They claim that ray triangle insertion throughput is now doubled so that the RT core delivers 39.7 RT teraflops compared to Turing's 23.8. They also claim that the new tensor core automatically identifies and removes less important DNN weights, and the new hardware processes the sparse network at twice the rate of Turing, 162.6 tensor teraflops with sparsity compared to Turing's 63 teraflops. So, all of that should mean significantly improved ray tracing and DLSS performance. But as we found previously with the RTX 3080, performance here was only improved over the 2080 Ti because the 3080 was faster in terms of raw performance. With the 3070, we now have an Ampere GPU with the same raw performance as the 2080 Ti, so how do they compare in terms of RTX performance? Starting with Death Stranding at 1440p, we see that DLSS performance is no better with the RTX 3070 when compared to the 2080 Ti. There is literally no improvement to be seen here. Even at 4K, we see a zero improvement in DLSS performance with the Ampere GPU. Even in F1 2020, we see very little change. Although the 3070 was 5% faster with DLSS enabled when compared to the 2080 Ti, we're talking about a very small increase. Moreover, we saw that margin completely evaporate at 4K, here the 3070 scales in line with the 2080 Ti. Then lastly, we had a look at Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and this gives us a look at DLSS and ray tracing performance, and when compared to the 2080 Ti, we see that the 3070 does nothing to improve ray tracing or DLSS performance. Even at 4K, there are no improvements to be seen with the so-called 2nd Gen RT cores and 3rd Gen Tensor cores. So that is super disappointing to see. And that brings us towards the end of our GeForce RTX 3070 review. Overall, the 3070, it is a great value product, though I am a little tentative to recommend you rush out and buy one, assuming good availability that is, as we know AMD is set to make their next gen big announcement roughly this time tomorrow. It'll be a few hours after this video went live, but yeah, not too long now. And no doubt we'll be able to provide you with reviews of those products within a reasonable time frame after that announcement. And that means in the very near future, the GeForce 30 series will have some kind of competition, and it is possible the RTX 3070 won't be the best value option at $500 US. Of course, we don't know just yet, but it's probably going to be one of those cases where it's worth waiting just a little bit. You won't have to wait too long, and then you'll be able to make a more informed purchase. Still, upcoming competition aside, in today's market, the RTX 3070 is as good as it gets in terms of cost per frame and even performance per watt. As I said, at $500, it's a great value product, offering performance that previously cost more than $1,000 US with an RTX 2080 Ti. The 3070 really is the new and much more affordable 2080 Ti, with the exception of the missing 3GB of VRAM. Performance is basically identical, which is both good and a little bit disappointing depending on what you're testing. Obviously, the raw GPU performance is excellent, matching the 2080 Ti across the board. It also matched the DLSS and RT performance, which I guess is good, but also a bit disappointing given Nvidia's touting 2nd Gen RT cores and 3rd Gen Tensor cores. Finding that those claimed upgrades offer nothing new in terms of performance was disappointing. An advantage of the RTX 3070 is the improved power consumption. Shaving off about 60 watts means it's possible to make more compact graphics cards or larger models that run cooler and quieter, which is what we're likely going to see from most AIB models. I feel like normally I'd be a lot more excited to see previous gen flagship performance available at the $500 price point, or alternatively, an almost 40% performance boost over the previous $500 part. In this case, that would be the 2070 Super. But given the lack of availability for parts such as the RTX 3080, and comments from those in the industry that suggest we may be looking at another MSRP bait and switch akin to that of the 2080 Ti, I'm not getting too excited just yet. It's extremely important in my opinion that Nvidia addresses the supply issue as soon as possible and ensures that base models do hit the MSRP. Otherwise, it's going to become very difficult for reviewers and perhaps more importantly, you guys, customers, to believe their MSRP figures in the future. So we'll just have to wait and see on that one. But as I said, it's very important that Nvidia does improve supply and make sure that the MSRPs are hit. But anyway, that is going to do it for our RTX 3070 review. And again, we would like to dedicate this review to Kevin. We very much miss him. So maybe if you can, jump over to Kevin's channel, Tech Showdown, and leave a comment there. I know his family will be reading those, and yeah, so that'd be really nice if you could do that. And of course, we have Teddy back here as well. So yeah, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time.